Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports, and we are glad to have you with us today. The first round of the first 12-team playoff, all those games have happened. We're going to talk about them. We're going to break them down. Happy holidays, by the way, everybody. We're going to be doing 2 episodes this week like we normally do. They're going to be a little shorter, but you know what? This is fun. We still want to talk college football with you. We want to talk about all the action. But before we get to it, let me remind you, you can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show, where we do sometimes video highlights, we run polls, and listen to your feedback. Take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. But here we are. The first round is over. We made our predictions last week. It turns out all we had to do is just pick the favorites in each one, or at least pick the higher seed. But what did you make of all this? First of all, well, how are you? You seem you're a little congested right now. Is it the holiday kind of bug going around? Is it something from having an infant? Or I guess a baby now. But is that part of that, or how are you feeling?
It's the best of every world. Yes, I think that there's a lot going on. I haven't slept very much, and also yes, our baby was sick a little bit last week, and for whatever reason, I seem a lot more susceptible to this stuff than my wife has so far. So lucky her. She probably takes care of herself and all, while I just kind of exist through college football season. So but no days off, not until college football season is over. What does Rothstein says, we'll sleep in February, right? We'll sleep in February, get back up for March, sleep again in April. It'll be great. But no, it was interesting, right? So like you said, all the favorites won. If you picked only favorites in your bracket, congratulations. Also, you're boring. I'm sorry, you're boring. You don't do that. Don't do that. Like, come on. Obviously, the teams that were favored were going to win. I think this was, from a game perspective, some of the worst case scenarios. And it wasn't just necessarily that the teams won. It was like, I think that based on a couple of matchups, based on a couple of like early breaks and stuff like that, like it just kind of was clear early that some of these teams were not going to be able to compete. The game that I obviously picked as the upset was SMU Penn State. That did not happen, to say the least. But like, I mean, again, nobody who watched the games will be able to like think that SMU ever had a chance. But I hope that people saw some of the game script stuff that I thought could happen. It just all went the wrong direction when they threw 3 interceptions, 2 of which were returned for pick sixes. But I kind of felt going in, Indiana Notre Dame was probably the worst of the actual like matchups from a football perspective, and I think that in many ways that came to fruition. Clemson played pretty well against Texas overall. I think that what you have to be excited about if you're a Clemson fan is I think that you just revealed what your offense is going to look like next year. You have 2 really good freshman receivers in TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco to go with a really good quarterback in Cade Klubnik. So I think that I did grades after the games for all of the winners and losers. I gave Clemson like a B- because I think that like this is everything you hope to see in that game, was just having a chance and having a future. And then like Tennessee, man, I was very, very concerned about how Tennessee was going to be able to move the ball against Ohio State's defense. And I was completely validated on that point. I did not expect that Ohio State would obliterate Tennessee's defense the way that they did. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. This has been one of the top 5 defenses in the entire country all season long. So I will admit the way that they got absolutely embarrassed surprised me just a little bit, but this is what I needed to see about Ohio State heading into the playoff. And now I feel like my national title pick looks just a little bit smarter.
Yeah. Before we get kind of into each of the games in a little more detail, one of the things, and this has been, I think, oft discussed, and if you've been on social media, you all have seen this, especially during the games. And as they started to turn into, the favorites winning, shocker there was this weird vibe that, did the playoff fail? Did they have too many teams? I remember, and I know I shared this with just sort of our producer Joey and you when I was I got stuck in an airport lounge for 12 hours on Saturday. I was coming back. I was helping with the Gasparilla Bowl. That's a whole other kettle of fish, but I did get to look like a pirate. That was fun. Anyway, on the way back, I'm watching this in the airport lounge because what else is there to do? And I was hearing just sort of more casual fans talking about it. I remember there were these, I don't want to put it, well, I don't care. They don't know who they are. These 60-ish year old women having a conversation about the college football playoff. And they're like, this is just such a mistake. Why do they need to have all of these teams? And part of me is thinking, like, while I wanted to talk with them, I wasn't going to. I was thinking this is, though, a symbol of the casual fan. This is like some of those who really don't follow college football, who may not, obviously, in the level of depth that people who cover the sport do, people like us, or people like you who listen to this because you care so much about it. We all know that, yeah, this could have happened. This wasn't the greatest thing, but still, this was a good step. And for some of these teams, it could very well, even if you lost in that first round, Indiana, Clemson, Tennessee, SMU, this was still a great season for y'all. I mean, all four of those teams are pretty happy with where they ended, given, the expectations probably heading into the season. They made it to the playoff, and you can recruit based off of that. You can say, like, look, we have the foundation here. We can add more people. There is a hope for those teams. But then at the same time, we heard people like, did the playoffs fail? Should we turn back the clock? I actually had a conversation with someone I thought was quite educated on college football. I'm not going to name them. But they were like, I prefer the BCS. And I was like, what? Are we giving these people now, are we platforming these people? I mean, like, where did all of you come from? Where were you all hiding? Like, do you not remember the BCS? Like, at that point, why don't we just go back to, like, the bowl system? I mean, or what? Check that. We should just go back to crowning a national champion at the end of the regular season, like we used to do back when Grandpappy was alive in the 1950s. I mean, it's absurd where these folks are going. So I think people need to remember, in the 14 playoff, actually, let's go back. In the BCS era, there were blowouts. There was a USC-Oklahoma game that was nowhere near as close as people thought it was going to be at the end of the 2004 season. There were plenty of semifinal blowouts that went into the 14 playoffs. So these things did happen. And occasionally, you get an unexpected upset. Like TCU, I don't think anyone thought they had a chance against Michigan. They pull that upset, and then reality check in the national championship game. But so these moments did happen. But it's been weird to see all of these conversations. I mean, it took so long to get out of the bowl system. It took so long. I mean, the Rose Bowl did so much to slow down progress. And here, after just one 12-team playoff, you get some people like, oh, we got to change it. Oh, we got to tinker with it. And to be fair, as much as I decry this, I do worry that it's going to give some excuse to perhaps the Big Ten and SEC when they get a chance to perhaps revise this, not after this season, but going into the next one.
Well, here's a stat, right? So the average margin of victory, this is from Matt Baker over at The Athletic. The average margin of victory for the first 3 first-round games this year, before the Tennessee game, it went up a little bit after that, was 17.3. That was the average margin of victory. The median margin of victory of the 20 first-round games of the 14 college football playoff era was 17 points. So, like, it's not new that we have big victories involving these teams. Frankly, college football is a sport of blowouts. Like, that's something that happens a lot. That's just part of the game. I mean, even think about, like, when Tennessee played Georgia, hugely anticipated game. That was a 2-touchdown game, right? Like, this thing happens. This isn't the end of the world when you get a matchup that's not as good as you thought that it was going to be. The other thing, too, that I'd point to is that judging the expanded playoff and just this whole new paradigm of college football on the first round games only, just the results and entertainment value of those games, and not one, the actual, like, full structure of the system, like seeing it all the way through, and 2, its impact on the rest of the season and of college football, I think it's just being very short-sighted. Something that I pointed to a lot this weekend is that if the 12-team playoff doesn't exist, Ashton Genty's Heisman caliber season does not exist. Like, it just doesn't. And the reason for that is I spoke to Ashton Genty before the season. And one of the things that convinced him to say, and by the way, turned down offers that were 2 or 3 times bigger than what he had other places just to stay at Boise State was because he had an opportunity to do something at Boise State that had never been done. So like that's relevant to this field. And look, if it was an 18 playoff, they would have been in, but they would have been right on the borderline, right? Like we just have no guarantee that a season like that would have ended in the college football playoff. And I think that you even talk about some of the conversations we got to have on this show about sort of the G5 subplot that we talked about a lot, right? The Boise State, the UNLV, the Army, like all of that was covered in a different kind of way because it impacted the college football playoff. The conference championships, multiple of them impacted the college football playoff. A playoff spot was decided on a 56-yard field goal by a freshman. That's crazy, right? Like, I think that people are being very short-sighted to say, well, the only marker of success is every individual game needs to be entertaining in the postseason or it was not worth it. And the other piece, too, that I want to point to is everybody freaked out like, well, if we let Alabama, at least we know that they wouldn't have gotten blown out. They just got blown out like 3 weeks ago by Oklahoma. They scored 3 points against them. And like the other piece too is like they had obviously the win over Georgia, which was real, but they jumped out to a 28-0 lead and like basically had to hold on for dear life after that. Look at the rest of their resume. They should have lost to South Carolina. They lost at Tennessee. Their wins over Missouri and LSU look way worse than they did at the time. Like, I'm sorry, this team absolutely would have gotten blown out by Ohio State. This team absolutely could have gotten blown out by Notre Dame or by Penn State. The only place where that couldn't happen is in people's imaginations. So, like, again, we're going to have games that are blowouts. We're going to have matchups that are unbalanced. That's going to happen. But this is so much bigger than individual games on one weekend of college football. And the only good part about this is that at the end of the day, one of the teams, actually, no, sorry, 2 of the 4 teams that got destroyed in the first round of the college football playoff were the second place Big Ten team and the third place SEC team. So, like, I'm sorry, if you think that an answer to this system is just guarantee spots for those 2 conferences, that's just an idiotic idea.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me to think, especially going back, what this would have looked like if we had the 14 playoff. We would have not had Notre Dame and Ohio State part of this because Ohio State happened to. I was still that the further this goes along, the more people will want to write about that Michigan game. But all of that said, this was a good symbol of, what? These 2 teams are still in the race. I mean, imagine if it had been last season, we'd be talking about Penn State versus Notre Dame. Why did a 2-loss Penn State team get in over that? But they're all in. And the wonderful thing is, none of these teams that lost can say they didn't get a chance to prove it. They had their chance. We settled it on the field. And it's funny, especially the conversations about Alabama, which certainly got going. And even there was a certain coach named Lane Kiffin who was tweeting up a almost over-the-top storm throughout the day. Kind of went quiet after that Tennessee game. Kind of went quiet as that game started to turn south. And I do wonder if that was kind of he was kind of holding himself out there. And I get it. I mean, Lane isn't an idiot. He has fun with social media. He's willing to take risks that a lot of coaches are not willing to take. And sometimes it really works, and sometimes it gets him in a little bit of hot water, but I don't blame him for it. But I thought he did end up almost becoming a symbol for the entire chirping fest we got from the SEC about like, oh, these teams were worthless. We should have had more of our teams in there. And then Texas kind of scooches by Clemson. They almost made it interesting there. And we'll break that a little bit more down after the break. And then Tennessee gets the worst loss of them all. And this is a team that was, I mean, again, I felt bad for the Vols. I can't believe the Vols were more sympathetic than I think I've ever seen them. I ever would have expected them to be in the playoff because they were going there. They were having fun. They were being stupid, but in the good way, good college football way. And then watched the second coming of Ohio State, use them as an example. I have to say, though, this is something I'm glad we saw these games. I'm glad it settled on the field. I think as we move forward, if they don't tinker with this anymore, people are going to realize that, the wonderful thing about this system is it's going to have some definitive answers. And you know what? No one's going to complain at some of these schools anymore because you had your chance and you lost it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to the next round. But when we get back from this break, we're going to start taking a quick look at some of the games that took place here in the first round of the playoffs here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, so we had a chance to kind of talk about the macro issues, which have been, again, their whole thing. The policy of both of us right now is we love the way this playoff is because these first round games were wonderful to see have in action. But at the same time, we saw the favorites win in each game. Let's take a quick, closer look at each one. We can go, I guess, in chronological order. The opener was a game that everyone wanted to talk about all day because of those shots of the snow at Notre Dame Stadium that just captured everyone's attention. Suddenly we're like, this is what the first round playoffs are all about. If anything, it was a mild shame that the team that was visiting was from the same state, so it wasn't like they weren't familiar with that kind of weather. But we had Indiana head into Notre Dame. That was one I know you and I weren't really thinking Indiana was going to pull it off. I mean, we knew the ticket prices going up really high because for a lot of Indiana fans, this was the chance to really get a chance to even see their team in a college football playoff after what was a Cinderella season. But then Cinderella, just like Army, just like Navy, met those folks from Notre Dame, and they have been doing nothing other than killing Cinderellas all season long. What did you make of the game?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's about what I expected. It's just a tough matchup for them because of how good Notre Dame is defending the pass. And I think one question that I had, especially entering the playoff, was how would Notre Dame? And by the way, one piece of one note: Notre Dame has been pretty hurt in the trenches. They actually lost another key player, Riley Mills, their star defensive tackle and sack leader, to a season-ending injury during the game. But so I was wondering if that was going to impact them when they went against another team that isn't great in the trenches, but can definitely hang against good teams in the trenches. But Notre Dame looked more like Ohio State in this game. Like when you talk about up front, they managed to keep things moving. Look, it wasn't an elite game, certainly from their offense. I think that I want to see more, but I also think Indiana's a very underrated defense. People are going to take away from the season that, oh, well, Indiana was just not good and played. That's not what happened. They were a really, really good defensive team who did some really nice things on offense. They just didn't necessarily have the trench depth up front on offense to maybe keep up with some of these elite level teams. And even then, when they started to get a little more aggressive too, you saw that start to come together a little bit in the fourth quarter. I think that not just with this Indiana game, but I also look at, maybe the Tennessee game at times, with the SMU game at times. I know that some of this is just the power of these defenses, but I think that you just need to throw bigger swings at times. I think that you would take maybe an early interception or something like that to try to stretch the field a little bit, prove that you're not afraid of going downfield. And again, that's much easier said than done. I get it. If you don't have the playmakers who are creating separation, then there's just not a whole lot you can do. But Indiana, unfortunately, offensively was limited to a very conservative game plan. And I just don't think that was ever going to be a marker of success for them.
Yeah, I remember I actually read, and again, I recommend those of you who haven't read Sean's article on CBSSports.com where he was grading this stuff, but you gave that offense an F. It was, I believe, your lowest. Actually, did you give Indiana your lowest grade overall?
I gave SMU a lower grade.
Oh yeah, SMU.
The reason that I said was I gave Indiana a D plus overall, which was actually my third lowest. I gave Tennessee a D and SMU a D minus. But the reason that I gave Indiana the highest of the failing grades was because their defense, I think their defense gave about a B, maybe a B minus. Their offense just gave an F. Their offense was probably, Tennessee was a real fight. I was gonna say their offense was probably the worst unit to play in the playoff this first weekend. Again, it's kind of a battle between the three losing offenses of Tennessee, of SMU, and Indiana. But I think that their offense was probably the worst unit to play between these four games.
Why do you think they went so conservative? Do you think it was a reaction to the weather, or do you think they were just playing not to lose?
No, I mean, I think there's two pieces of it. So one, I mean, their defense was playing really well, and I don't think that the coaching staff wanted to put their defense in a bad situation. We heard after the game, and I don't love hearing this, right? I don't love hearing this, but Kurt Signetti said after the game that the reason that he punted late in the fourth quarter was because the defense was fighting. And so I think that there was an aspect of wanting to protect the defense, which did work at times. I mean, Notre Dame only scored 27 points. That's really not a lot. It's one of their lower overall outputs of the season. But I think the other piece too is that they just didn't have individual playmakers who could create separation in space consistently enough. They don't have an elite receiver. I think that maybe having an elite receiver changes the game just a little bit. They obviously were having issues protecting too, so I don't even know if those downfield routes could have developed necessarily. So I think it was a combination of things. Some that was coaching decisions, some that was not. But ultimately, it meant that the offense really didn't do anything of note.
Yeah, absolutely. But that defense, you're right, did perform fairly well. But there's only so much they can do when your offense just isn't getting it off the field, or getting off the field too quickly and putting too much on you there. Um, do you think? And I just want to kind of look at this, because obviously in our next episode, we'll talk about a little bit more about Notre Dame and how they're moving forward. But what did you make of just the overall Notre Dame game plan? How do you think they reacted well to Indiana? Because we're focusing on Indiana's failures, but what did Notre Dame also do to kind of make this a game that they could dominate the overall the entire program? I mean, the entire Indiana team.
Well, I think they really wanted to own the game in the trenches, as you can imagine, and they were able to do that at a high level. I think offensively, you saw a desire to grind them down, to grind Indiana down. They threw the ball only 23 times compared to 35 rushes on the ground. And this was something that I was keeping an eye on too, was kind of the distribution of carries. Jeremiah Love only got 8 of the 30 that went to their top 3 guys, and that's kind of what I expected. I expected to see a lot of Riley Leonard running the ball in this game. I expected to see more rotation, but that was something that they wanted to do. They wanted to set the tone. They wanted to set the tempo. I think that the fact that this game, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the final number was, but like it went by quick. It was not a very long game because Notre Dame was able to shorten the game, and Notre Dame obviously has explosive components to its team. We saw that with a 98-yard touchdown run by Jeremiah Love. But that's not what this team is built on. This team is built on winning down to down, play to play. And I think that for them, I don't want to simplify it as much to like they wanted to give I think what they wanted to do in so many ways was like, we are the better team. Let's not create more possessions and opportunities for Indiana to get a chance to get back in this game. And ultimately, they were able to do just that.
Yeah, what do you make of those last couple of minutes? I was at a sports bar in Tampa watching the end of this game. I'm like, me and my small group of folks who were from Reddit's our CFP. We were like the only people in the bar, even though they're all like lots of college fans, but it was more of that bar for people who still wish they lived the frat life in their 20s and 30s. But like, I was watching the screen, those final 2 minutes. I admit I was going a little bit bonkers because you always hope for those crazy endings, not because you're rooting against the team, but just because you like them. What do you make of those wacky final couple of minutes? Was that just a bit of luck, a bit of bad luck, depending on what side of the coin you're on, or was that something where Notre Dame may have shown a little bit of like lack of focus because it was like, hey, we're about to win our first playoff game?
Well, I think it was mostly just kind of things happening, but um, what I do think was something that did work a little bit in that last little stretch for Indiana was I thought they did a little more tempo. Like I thought that they sped things up a little bit. And again, when you're a coaching staff and a team that wants to protect its defense, that's why you don't do tempo consistently. Is because the thing about tempo, and this was something by the way, Tennessee learned the hard way. When you run tempo and don't run well, then you're off the field in 74 seconds and then your opponent gets the ball back. But like when you do mix in just a little bit of tempo, like it just doesn't allow the opposing defense to fully get set, to get exactly into the play call that they want, to get into the personnel that they want. Like the reality is, if you put best on best between Notre Dame and Indiana against each other, like Notre Dame's going to win on both sides, probably, especially with their defense against Indiana's offense, but really on both sides. So, what tempo allows you to do is to prevent Notre Dame from getting best on best, essentially. They don't get their best play call, they don't get their best personnel package in. And I think that you saw that a little bit at the end of the game. Now, big picture, I don't think it mattered. I don't think that it says a whole lot about like deficiencies for Indiana or so for Notre Dame, but I do think that if you are Arizona State and you're going against Texas, if you're Boise State and you're going against Penn State, like it's something to think about.
Absolutely. So heading over to the next game of the afternoon, we of course had, or actually the next morning, we had SMU heading into Penn State. This is one where you and I differed a little bit. You thought this is going to be an opportunity for SMU to shock the world, and what they did was a little shocking, but not necessarily in a way that worked out for the Mustangs. Again, another kind of ballyhooed environment. It was a cold one. This is probably the biggest differential from a team from the Dallas-Fort Worth area heading into a rather cold and hostile Penn State, venue. One that I know our producer Joy Aliberti was on the ground there, and he said, he actually was on the ground quite literally. He said that field, at the very least, at the edge of the field, was still quite frozen solid. There were a lot of thoughts on what SMU would have to do going into this game, whether or not they could keep up with the physicality of a Penn State team. And it seemed like we got a lot of, it seemed like it wasn't just the matchup, it was also just internal issues. And I'm not sure what exactly went wrong. How did Kevin Jennings, was it just a mental, because hey, these guys, they're still in college, they're still pretty young. You put the lights on them. Sometimes you have a bad moment. What do you think went wrong here? What do you think? How did SMU? Where would your fingers point to why the Mustangs just didn't get anywhere close to what they had hoped to do against the Penn State Nittany Lions?
Well, I thought that through the first quarter and a half, 2 quarters, I felt like they hung in the trenches pretty well. I thought that they were competing. I thought that they did a great job defensively. I mean, you even see on that first drive, and that was a scripted drive. You don't want to overreact to that, but they kind of marched down the field early. And I think that tempo, like we talked about, was a big part of it as well. They really wanted to get after it on that first drive. It was just a total Kevin Jennings disaster class. And I talked about him a lot in the lead up to the game. I think he's a very talented player. He's a winner. I think he has a bright career at SMU, but this was the worst of every scenario, right? Somebody who's just never been on this stage, somebody who I think at times reverted back to his worst instincts. I don't think he was seeing the field well at all. And again, I just felt like when that happened, well, I mean, again, there was the first one, which is just a thing that happens. When you throw the second one, that's oh, I don't trust myself anymore. I can't do this. You look at SMU again, that first drive, they have essentially a wide open touchdown pass that Matthew Hibner drops, their tight end. And then on the other side, right, 3 possessions later, you get the ball within the opposing 20-yard line and Kevin Jennings throws an interception and you get no points off of that. As opposed to then you have 2 separate pick sixes thrown. That's a 28-point swing, potentially, that you're talking about. And by the way, the score at halftime was 28-0. So, I think it was always going to be hard for SMU to win this game, but they made it impossible with their own mistakes that were largely unforced. I even look at that second pick six. I think it was a 58-yard one. SMU just didn't even seem to have any communication of who was going to tackle the interceptor. It was crazy. And you even saw that James Franklin had such little faith in his own kicking game that they went for it on their own side. Sorry, yeah, it wasn't a tournament. It was they got stuffed on 4th and 1. So there were opportunities if you tackle that ball carrier, maybe they don't score points at all, but just nobody did. And so the thing that I told somebody in the lead up to this game is I feel like SMU has the ability to take advantage of margins. But the issue for them is going to be, I think, where the cold may factor in. And by the way, it is 65 degrees in Dallas right now where I'm sitting. But I think that the one place where the cold could factor in is, I think that it could make you quit. It could make you be like, I am running into a 315 pounder and I'm freezing and my joints hurt and I'm being thrust into the ice and this sucks, and let's just go home. I think that especially I think that up until the last drive of the first half, the sort of only full touchdown drive that Penn State had the entire first half, I think up to that point, I think that Penn State was really battling. They were really giving themselves SMU was really giving themselves a chance. In the second half, though, it felt very like, okay, we're just can we sim to end on this game? Like, I think even the players would have been like, can we play with a running clock? Can we get out of here? I'm done with this. Like, this is not fun anymore. So no, I mean, I'm not shocked that it went the way that it did, but I will say the thing that did shock me was I was shocked that Kevin Jennings was the reason that it got so out of hand.
One thing I will say for SMU fans and for Kevin Jennings, there have been plenty of situations where quarterbacks who went on to have pretty great careers just end up having that bad game. I mean, college quarterback didn't necessarily have a mega success in the NFL. I remember Jake Locker had just an insanely bad game against Nebraska early in his career. And you know what? Say what you will. He went in the first round of the NFL draft, or heck, Kyle McCord, he made it into the top 10 of the Heisman vote, and he had that game against Pitt where he apparently just forgot how to throw the ball to his own teammates. Although he had several great scoring passes to Pitt. So anywho, all of that said, let's move on to a couple of these other games, the last two. Clemson at Texas, that was an exciting game. It got interesting thanks to Cade Klubnik. I mean, I love this game because it reminded me of the discussion we had about their high school matchup, where Cade Klubnik's team beat Quinn Ewer's team, but Quinn Ewers had the better game overall. This is like the reverse of that. Unfortunately, probably higher stakes because this was actually a college football playoff game. But the Texas won, but Clemson, thanks to their quarterback, was in it pretty late. That pick six that was taken back for a block. That one was a little bit, again, that one felt a little iffy, and then they couldn't punch it in on fourth down to make it a one-score game late in the game. Clemson came close. That's the one game where I have the most trouble with anyone saying like, oh, this was not a good game. These were all terrible. That one was actually genuinely good at the end. Things just didn't quite go Clemson's way. And again, granted, Texas is extremely talented. And in those key moments, we saw the raw talent of Texas step up, like in that fourth down stop at the goal line. So what did you make of this one?
Yeah, well, and like you said, I mean, I think that to group all four of these games together is a little silly. It's also hilarious that I would argue the two like more underwhelm or like the two biggest underperformances in the college football playoff so far were by two SEC teams. But that's a whole other conversation. But I do think that you look at this game, and I mentioned off the top, what I wanted to see from Clemson in this game is I wanted to see a future. I wanted to see a future that looked interesting. I wanted to see players step up. I wanted to see them look good and compete and contend against a team that is one of the best in the country in the University of Texas. And Clemson did it. They did it. They have two wide receivers that I think are long-term like stars for this program. And like, what more can you ask for? TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco are going to be all ACC players next year, maybe even in the preseason. Cade Klubnik will be back next year. Him and Kevin Jennings will be kind of duking it out to be that next that first team all ACC quarterback, most likely. And by the way, if the playoff is any indication, it's probably going to be Klubnik. But and then like even Antonio Williams, who was their breakout star this year at receiver, he's only a sophomore. Like he's got at least one more year remaining. So like what you wanted to see from Clemson was to see some excitement on offense. Now, defensively, and we got to talk about that rushing defense. We knew coming in, this was going to be the big question mark of the game is whether Clemson could contend in the rushing game. And the answer was no, not at all. Like, not at all. Any moment that Texas made it a game, it was when they tried to get away from the rushing game. And not like Quinn Ewers was totally fine. Like the passing game was fine. It was like the decision making of the passing game. It was the play calling of bringing back in the passing game. It's like at times Sark wanted to just like make a point, and you didn't need to make a point. Just hand the ball to your best players right now in Jaden Blue and Contravian Wisner. So uh again, like Clemson's gonna have to solve some issues on the defensive side of the ball. Ever since Brent Venables left, it feels like it has been okay. This defense is still really good under Wes Goodwin, and the offense has been a disaster. I think that it's starting to flip back the other way around, where the guys who were brought in by Todd Bates and by Brent Venables are starting to graduate out of the program. And I just don't think that they're replacing them fast enough and developing them at a high enough level, especially when you talk about those linemen. So this is going to, I think, be a big offseason. We did see, by the way, with Clemson, they got some transfers coming in. They had never done it before with like legitimate transfers coming in, only sort of fake transfers to basically be student assistants. Well, they got some coming in now. The headliner is Will Height, the edge defender from Purdue. So they understand what they need, but that's going to be the big question: is if Clemson is going to return to national contention, I think they got to fix that run defense.
Absolutely. Well, let's wrap this particular episode up by looking at the finale. The Tennessee at Ohio State. My goodness, there was so much going into that game. We talked about it. Would Ohio State, the last we saw them, they were fighting people on their home field over a flag planting. Would they have that energy? We knew Tennessee fans had managed to buy up a significant chunk of Ohio Stadium. There was fun to hear some of the stories of even the Welcome to Columbus sign had a Tennessee T stuck to the side of it. Like, they were having fun. They were making themselves known that they were out there, and the Vols fans were ready to probably be joined by some frustrated Ohio State fans if the game started to go south. My goodness, it's like suddenly Ryan Day and company, because this is a big question. Would they implode? Would they be one of these super talented teams that just collapse for reasons that, we just can't, psychologically, it couldn't come together? Instead, as you pointed out, we saw the team that you think is going to win a national championship. We genuinely saw that team appear, and Tennessee completely collapsed. And again, maybe if Tennessee had a different opponent, they would have done better, but they may have just faced the eventual national champion, or at least the runner-up at this point.
Yeah, it was something else, man. Like that's the kind of game that makes you reevaluate everything about not just that team, but about every team that they played beforehand. And really, I'm talking about both teams, by the way, about Ohio State and Tennessee. But like, oh man, this Tennessee offense is a problem. Like it's a real problem. Josh Heupel is an offensive coach. He brought in sort of that veer and shoot offense, of course, and had some success with it. But is this system just like figured out? Like, are we just done with this system? Because look at what happened in this game. When and Dylan Sampson dealing with an injury did not help. I also don't think that Dylan Sampson playing really makes much difference in this game. Like, I really don't. They probably wouldn't have gotten blasted on offense like they did, but they would have been stopped. They would have settled for field goals. Like, I don't think that they're keeping pace in any way. But like, this offense doesn't have any receivers who scare you. This offensive line, especially at tackle, just so inconsistent. And so much is put on a quarterback who I don't think has proven at any point this season is like a good college quarterback as yet. Like, he's really talented. Nobody's questioning that. But like, what's the game this year that made you feel like, ooh, Nico's a future star? Like, I feel like I saw that with Dylan Raiola. I feel like I saw that with other underclassmen quarterbacks. We saw that with Arch, for goodness sake. Like, I just don't feel like we saw a single moment where I feel like, oh, we should be afraid of that guy. Not just now, but and he'll get better. He'll get better. Hopefully the offense will get a little better. Like, maybe when he's a second or third year player in the system, it'll be better. But like, like a lot of Tennessee fans are freaking out about the defense right now, and they got diced apart. Like they did. They got destroyed. But like, I mean, I don't know. Like I don't know how you watch that game and take anything else away other than, whew, that Tennessee offense really needs to figure something out because they just do not have answers right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say how we have to evaluate every team both of them have played, because now I'm trying to sort out, because with certainly as we mentioned before the break, Lane Kiffin stopped tweeting around this game. This is the game where things started to look really ugly for those bubble teams in the SEC, where all of them was like, I don't know if I wanted to play in that game either. Like no matter who the SEC team was, I don't think it would have made a difference, especially with those that aren't necessarily Georgia. And even then, we'll talk about Georgia in our next episode and what the state they're in now. But my goodness, now looking at Ohio State, all of those teams they played, like we saw what they did to Indiana. Arguably, they were even more in control than Notre Dame was. And then, here we have, of course, this Oregon rematch we're going to get. That's going to be really exciting to see how these two turn out. It's a good segue, I think, to kind of getting ready for our next episode, because we have a couple of episodes this particular week for you. We didn't want to make them too long because we know it's the holidays, and happy holidays to all of you out there, no matter when you're listening to this. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We're going to thank all of you for listening. Thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show. He's Shehan J. Raja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan J. Raja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hayeri, part of the group that runs Reddit CFB. Thank you for joining us. Take care.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.